Hello.
Hello.
How do I change the name on this?
Oh, here I can. So you basically.
I found it.
Okay. Wait, you're not Jamie Lou. She's an imposter.
Cool. Okay, perfect.
But he's popping on. Hi, Dale.
No.
Can you hear? Joanna, AC.
Hi.
Hi. Thank you guys for joining. So we'll go, I guess it's 5:30. I know people are still popping on. So we're going to go ahead and start. And we've got Christina here. I don't even want to make the announcement because I'm super sad. So Christina, I'm going to let you take over.
Oh, so I get the luxury. Yeah. Thank
Sorry.
you. Okay.
Sorry.
Okay. We still have a couple people joining, so I'll wait.
Yeah, I'm really sorry, you guys.
Yeah, let's see. Dale's still joining. So, thanks. Thank you. Hello, everyone. I think this is everyone, at least for now. So my name's Christina. I've been flying as a flight instructor with Girls Love to Fly out of McClellan for, what is it, 4 or 5 months now. So it's been a really great organization to be a part of. And I'm sure a lot of you have heard the news that is, very heartbreaking that our beloved Richard Conti passed away last weekend. It was just a truly tragic situation, and he was a really big part of our foundation and group. And so we are just trying to do our best as pilots do and carry on and live out the legacy of the great pilots that we unfortunately lose in this world, right? And so I always think of what my dad said, and that in aviation, you're going to meet amazing people, and unfortunately, not all of them get to stick around. And so, everyone send all the loves and hugs to Jamie and Girls Love to Fly. But we're going to do what we do, and we're going to keep on flying and carry on and learn the best we can. Oh, Dale's trying to join again. Let me see if Dale can get in before I get started here. It's okay, Jamie. We love you. Let's see, is Dale able to join yet? Says joining. She's trying. Okay, well, I will go ahead and get started then. So, Anaya, I love that. Yes, exactly. And that's exactly what Jamie and I were saying, and that we just want to carry on. He would be sad if we weren't continuing to learn and share the love of flying that we all have together. So
yeah, that's the only reason I showed up too, because I've been crying for a week because I'm sad because he was my co-captain, for those of you who didn't know, in the Challenger. So not only for the nonprofit, him and I had a friendship, and it was really a good one. So Richard would kick my butt if I wasn't here, and he'd kick your butts if we didn't, move forward. We have, I'm blessed enough to have really good people in my, Girls Love to Fly circle that have supported all of this, and we're going to continue, like Christina said, on his legacy with, teaching everyone what he's taught us, and continuing to fly, which is our big thing. I know he would want us to be here and to continue to fly and to have fun and just to enjoy. So with that being said, we will go ahead and get started.
All right, perfect. So thank you, Jamie. Does anyone have any preference? Do you want to start with visual illusions, or do we want to start with runway incursions? Both very exciting topics. Indifference? Okay. In that case. Oh. Dale, I hope you can get in. Dale's been trying to get in.
She has a little bit, sometimes it takes
She's
her.
in.
Yeah, sometimes it takes her a couple tries. Let's start with, do you have a preference on what we start with? Come on, somebody's got to give, I'm going to make somebody needs to pick.
Runway.
Okay.
There you go. Boom.
You got it. You got it. I'm so excited because those of you who go on to do your CFI, you're going to create all these lesson plans and no one's ever going to look at them. But now you guys get to look at them. So can everyone see my screen here? Yes. Perfect. Okay. So I will try to cut through what's dry and make it fun to a certain extent. So we're going to talk about runway incursion avoidance. By definition, I think I have a slide here with the definition. It's actually any occurrence in the airport runway environment involving an aircraft, vehicle, person, or object on the ground that creates a collision hazard. So this can be taking off, taxiing, landing, intending to go take off. So at the end there it says intending to do so, right? So in the process of taxiing, you have to go take off. In the process of taxiing back to land, anything that puts you in a risk of a collision hazard with person, object, vehicle of any sort is considered a runway incursion. And especially since a lot of us train at non-towered airports, I think this is something that's often kind of glossed over. So we're going to go ahead and talk about that today. So I will share this PowerPoint with you. I don't want to watch this right now, but this is like 3 minutes long. This was in 1977 at the Tenerife airport between two airliners that essentially, due to low visibility and misunderstandings with air traffic control, ended up colliding with one another. So I will share the PowerPoint with you guys. So when we talk about collision avoidance and runway incursions, there's just things to think about here, right? So when you're at the airport, you have a lot more other vehicles, a lot of aircraft, cars, more people, and just a really busy array of taxiways and different locations that you're not allowed to enter, so on and so forth, right? So it requires a lot of planning and coordination and communication in order to prevent any incidents from occurring. And let me pull up. Okay, so if you guys have any questions, by the way, just chime in. Okay, so I always say when we get into the airplane, right, we start at the plan, we get the weather, we figure out what runway we're going to use. And this more so pertains to non-towered airports than towered airports, because at towered airport, you get the luxury of, okay, you have information Bravo that plays on the ATIS and it tells you runway 22 left and right are in use or wherever runways you're at, right? So I always brief the expected taxi route. So if you are at a towered airport and they do say these are the runways in use, say, okay, we're expecting Alpha to Kilo to runway 16. These are the hot spots. And so on taxi diagrams, if you guys have ForeFlight nearby, let me pull mine up real quick. I believe KSAC has quite a few. Oh, they only have a couple. Well, here's, since I don't know how to share it that way. But there's our taxi diagram, right? So I always sit here and say, okay, here we are on the ramp and we're expecting to get taxi via Alpha Mike to runway 20, for example. And then we see that here at Hotel Mike Alpha Bravo, this intersection is located as hotspot 1. And so briefing that, hey, this is a zone that people get into trouble a lot is a really useful way to avoid potential collisions. And then especially when you go to an unfamiliar tower or airport that has a tower, if they can, you can always request a progressive taxi. So this is workload dependent. If the tower or ground is too busy, they might not be able to accommodate you. And so in situations like that, I would suggest once you get off clear of the runway, stop for a moment and thoroughly brief your turns, right? So, okay, we're going to we're on mic now. We're going to take a right onto Bravo. And whenever you are confused again, make sure you bring the airplane to a stop before you just continue on your taxi. So we always talk about procedures for appropriate cockpit activities, right? So hopefully when you are in the cockpit, you do your safety brief with your CFI and you talk about the sterile cockpit. And so my safety brief in regards to sterile cockpit is that anytime we are taxiing, taking off, landing, or about to do 3 of those things, all of our communication is related to the safety of our flight. So it consists of me communicating to my student in an instructional way, or the student asking questions, or us confirming with each other that, okay, we're clear on the right, we're clear on the left, and we're going to be taxiing to the right. We always make sure that we've established communications with ATC. So especially right now, Girls Love to Fly flies out of McClellan Airport, and the fire season in California is kicking up. So we've got a temporary tower there now. And so now my students are going to have to switch to this new method of communicating with the tower that verifies that, okay, we have information of the weather and we would like to taxi to runway 16. And so we have to ask for that taxi clearance, we have to verify it, and then we actually have to perform it. And if at any point during that taxi clearance, we are unclear, that's your cue to stop your aircraft, literally just stop it, hit the brakes on the ground, and figure out where you're going to go or ask for clarification before you continue to go. And then a big one that I see people forget oftentimes is to review your NOTAMs, right? Especially at airports like McClellan or Sacramento International, Mather, for example, you have construction being performed and they just straight close runways or taxiways or get rid of taxiways entirely. They'll say that they've decommissioned a taxiway. So you want to make sure that if that's a route that you normally take, you're not going to accidentally take that one. Okay. Maintain center line unless obstacles are obstructing the path of your wingspan. Then maintain proper separation until you can get back on it. Know the layout of your airport, right? So I always say to my students, the first thing we do before we move that airplane is we pull out that taxi chart and we figure out, okay, where are we and where are we trying to go? I know these things sound really simple, but I had a very rocky start to one of my own check rides because I failed to do this. So it's very important. No visual aids at the airport, such as the signs, lightings, and markings, right? Any questions so far? Everyone doing good? I don't know what happened to the chat box on Zoom. Anyone? No? Good? No thumbs, just me and my thumb. Okay. Thank you. All right, so here is another airport diagram. So earlier I was talking about hotspots, right? So here we have hotspot 1, hotspot 2, and hotspot 3. And so this is an area where other people have collided or gotten very close to colliding. And so, for example, let's say I was over here at this hangar by Foxtrot 4, and I was to taxi over to this run up over at Golf 8, right? And they told me to taxi via Bravo, Alpha, Golf. And they said, you know, cross runway 6, cross runway 31. And so in my briefing, it would sound something like, okay, we're going to take a right onto Bravo. We have been given a clearance to cross runway 6, where there is a hotspot. We'll continue on until we take a left on Alpha and cross runway 13, where there's another hotspot, and then continue to take a right onto Golf. And so that kind of clarifies for everyone in the cabin that, okay, these are 2 zones that are common for our errors, and we want to make sure that we've briefed that. And then especially with bigger airports, really being clear on this turn will be a right turn, because you'll be surprised how many people go the way that they are expecting to go, or maybe the runway that they're used to using, so on and so forth. Non-essential task. So you're trying to load your GPS, you're trying to set up your ForeFlight, so on and so forth. Stop the plane. Or let's say your headset wasn't actually plugged in. Stop the plane. Do not continue to taxi while you're fixing your situation. Okay, prepare for possible taxi routes. Contacting ATC. So like I just said, we have a temporary tower at McClellan. You always want to contact ground first. So sound something along the lines of McClellan ground, Cessna 61329. We're sitting at the jet services ramp. We have the weather and we're ready to taxi to runway 16. And then we'll get back that clearance, taxi via Alpha, runway 16. And so they always want to hear that runway number, even if there's only one, technically two runway options, right? They always want to hear that. So your clearance back to them would be, okay, taxi via Alpha, runway 16, Cessna 61329er. And then we go down to runway 16, we do our run up, we get all ready, and then we go to the hold short line and immediately switch to tower. So unless you have something to query ground for, once you're done with your run up and you're at the hold short line, you're done talking to ground and you switch over to tower. That's when you request your departure. And usually I always tell students, make sure you include what you want to do, right? So am I leaving the pattern? Am I staying in the pattern? If I am leaving, where am I going? So McClellan Tower, Cessna 329er is holding short of 16 for a northbound departure. And then the tower is likely to tell you how to make that northbound departure. So, okay, do a right downwind departure or a left downwind departure. And so that helps you and also helps them sequence the traffic and then also know what to expect once you are in the air. Writing down instructions and reading them back is one of those things that's really helpful. Of course, we're so used to smaller, more mellow airports, but you go to bigger airports where they're talking to tons of planes all at once, you'll be surprised how quickly your brain spits out information. And so I think the phrase is the faintest ink is better than the strongest memory. So write it down, very helpful.
Is it helpful to ask, or when you communicate with ATC, identify yourself at least as a student pilot, so they maybe say things a little bit slower for you to understand?
Yes, absolutely. If you're on your own solo, or you're just even with your instructor and you would like that clarification, I do always suggest that my student solos say student solo or student pilot, so that they're a little more gentle. They're still going to give you the full ATC experience, but will be a little more kind with their cadence and speed at which they rattle off instructions, and always making sure that you take the time to just clarify, right? So it says right here, always verify. So if he rattles off, okay, make a right downwind departure and contact 127.4 super fast, and you only heard about half of it, that's your cue to say, I need you to repeat that. And never feel like, of course it's embarrassing, right? Whenever we don't feel that we're doing something to the level that we want to be at, never feel like you should just go in order to avoid that embarrassment, because it's a lot more embarrassing if you do the wrong thing. So yeah, go ahead and just say it. I didn't hear that. I need you to repeat. And so I always just say, Cessna 61329, can you please repeat that? Simple as that. And I always remind everyone, they're just people. They're just people in a tower. We're just people in a plane. We're just trying to all do the same thing and coordinate safety. So I do think that's a great idea, Dale. Okay, procedures for briefing a landing rollout to a taxiway exit. So especially if you go to busier airports and they're sequencing lots of airplanes at once, always make sure that if you are given what's called I'm not sure if I have that in here or not, what they call a lasso clearance, LAHSO, a land and hold short clearance, that you are able to do so, right? And so if they tell you to land and clear at Juliet, so at McClellan, let me pull up the diagram here. At McClellan, if they told you to clear at Bravo, I think it's about I want to say close to 2,000 feet down the runway. That gives you 2,000 feet from beginning to end of runway. They told you to land and hold short of Bravo. As a student pilot solo, you do not accept lassos. So if a tower were to assign you one, you say unable. And lassos are always based upon pilot discretion. So you are always able to deny a lasso request. However, once you do request it, you have to adhere to it. So if you are unable to land and clear the runway by a certain taxiway or stop clear of a certain taxiway, then you need to go around or tell the tower prior that you are unable to accept that. So anytime you're told to hold short of a runway, so if we look at Sacramento executives airport diagram again, you'd likely have to cross runway 12 going towards runway 20. So I don't know if you guys can see this on the screen, but so let's say you were down here and you're going to runway 20. You're you're gonna have to cross runway 12. So usually they'll rattle off in your call that, taxi via mic, cross 12 to runway 20. And I always say, even if you were cleared to cross, do a quick stop, take a look both directions and then cross. But say you got distracted on your taxi there and you come to the runway that you're crossing and did I get that? Always ask for clarification, key at that mic and say, ground, did you clear me to cross this runway? Perfect. Any questions so far? No? Okay. And then here's the difference with non-towered airports, right? So most of us, or I shouldn't say most of us, a lot of us learn out of a non-towered airport. So I hold myself to the same exact procedures as I would at a towered airport. Always make sure that before you go to taxi, you know the layout of the airport, you announce your taxi on the CTAF frequency. So McClellan would sound like McClellan traffic. Cessna 61329 is taxiing from the Jet Center via Alpha, runway 16. So that tells everyone that, hey, here, this is where I am. I'm going to be taxiing via Alpha, and I'm going to end up at the run up for runway 16. A before landing brief. So this is something I include with all my students when we are going to the airport or inbound after a flight lesson to the airport. I say we do our ABCs, right? So A is for the ATIS or the AWOS. We get the weather, we figure out what runway we're going to land on. B is for the briefing. And so we get really complacent because we're always used to landing on the same runway or the same airport every time, right? We always come home. But eventually you're going to go on your cross country, you're going to leave the area. So you do B for briefing. How am I entering this traffic pattern? So I always say, okay, here's our little plane. Actually, I have a little plane. That's a little better. Here's our plane and here's how the runway is oriented, right? And so I say, okay, we're going to fly over the runway, 500 feet above pattern altitude, and then we're going to enter the left downwind. And so I make it very clear to me or my passenger that this is how we are going to enter this traffic pattern so that there's no confusion when you're on top of the airport going, how am I going to enter this? And then after landing, of course, we clear the runway, get past that hold short line, clean up the aircraft, and then say, okay, Cessna 329 is taxiing back to the jet ramp via Alpha, so on and so forth. So taxiway lights, right? So night operations are a little bit different. Taxiway lights are always blue. Runway lights are almost always white, right? So of course, as they get closer to the end of the runway, they start to turn yellow and red to signify that you are running out of runway. Pilot controlled lighting. So this is really useful to spot airports, especially when you don't know where they are quite yet. 7 clicks will turn bright lights, medium clicks will turn 5, and low will turn 3. They stay on for usually about 15 minutes. So this is just on the CTAF frequency if it's a non-towered airport. And so usually I'll do the 7 clicks to light up the airport. And then once I get closer to the airport, I lower it down to 5 clicks because on final, those bright high intensity lights can deteriorate your night vision rather quickly, which we'll talk about shortly. Operations at non-towered airports. Use the CTAF to self-announce any ground movement or airborne position. Maintain vigilance. This is a big one, right? So especially at non-towered airports and heavy training environments, you're going to find a lot of people don't agree with self-announcing, so they just won't do it. And a lot of people don't pay attention to their surroundings, right? So when you learn how to drive, you always hear, be a defensive driver. It's the same thing when you're flying and taxiing. You want to be a defensive pilot. The other day, even at a towered airport, they cleared us to taxi via Alpha, and that they immediately cleared another aircraft to taxi the other way. And I told my student, just slow down. I don't think he sees you. And this plane proceeded to turn directly in our direction. And we kind of had to split the taxiway to make it past one another. And had we not been the defensive ones in that situation, recognizing that I don't think they see us, therefore we need to take action before both of us end up in an unfortunate situation. Okay. Be fully aware of the route, how to follow it, know your airport signs, hold short lines and markings. So being especially aware when you have multiple direction intersections like this, right? So you have the 90-degree turn and you have this 45-degree turn. And so recognizing which taxiway is what ahead of time as you're taxiing to it will definitely help in aiding to minimize that confusion. Okay, we've got all of our runway markings, our runway direction, runway directional signs. The black taxiway signs always indicates what you're currently on, and then yellow background indicates a directional sign. Exterior aircraft lighting. So we always turn on the rotating beacon before we start the plane up, right? That's a good indicator to anyone on the ground outside of the aircraft that, hey, we're about to start. And then before we start taxiing, we turn on our nav lights, taxi lights, and strobes if we have them. If you have to cross the runway, we want to make sure we have all the lighting on possible so that you're highly visible. And then we like to use our landing light when we are taking off, landing in the traffic pattern. However, the use of strobes and landing lights on the ground is one of those things that you kind of use at your discretion, right? So one day you go fly a big jet and you have really bright strobes and you're just doing a quick pre-flight to make sure they work. Let's make sure we don't have those, or you're about to taxi out from the ramp, make sure we don't have those all on and blind all the other pilots near us. Low visibility conditions, right? So when I share this PowerPoint, make sure you watch that video in the beginning. That is essentially what happened, right? So the tower thought they were in a certain location and they actually weren't. So the tower might not actually be able to visually see you at all times, especially if it's smoky, foggy, rainy. And yeah, at any point, if you're confused, stop the aircraft. Head down activities should only be performed when the aircraft is stopped. So this includes tuning radios, adjusting seat belts, checking ForeFlight for something, anything of that like. Stop the aircraft, do not be heads down while the plane is moving. Heading indicator for situational awareness. This is a really great one, right? Because as you're taxiing down towards runway 16, you should know that your compass should be indicating the reciprocal of that because you're going the opposite direction to use that runway. And so always verifying that, yeah, my heading indicator is where it should be. Okay, we don't have clearance bar lights at a lot of these airports. Some airports do, bigger airports tend to have these. So it's essentially just like the signals that we have while we drive cars, but they're instead installed into the ground. FAA categorizes different types of runway incursions. I hope that you guys never have to categorize any incursion that you come across. So anytime it's categorized in A, B, C, or D, that's an incident. And if it's an actual collision, then that's considered an accident. And then we also have the types. So there's pilot deviation where you deviated from a instruction or regulation. There's an operational incident, that's ATC not giving a proper separation. And there's a vehicle pedestrian deviation. So that's a person or vehicle entering a movement area without authorization. Okay, so I'm gonna make you guys participate. When should you look inside the cockpit when you're moving on the ground? Or when you're on the ground, period? Anyone? Guys, throw me a bone, please.
They never participate. It's not you, Christina. They did it with Richard either. He was always trying to force them to show their faces and to participate, and that wasn't happening. So don't feel bad. But come on, somebody. Hey, this is an easy one. That's an easy one.
When should your head be down while you're inside the cockpit? No? Yes? At any point?
Never.
Yeah, never. Awesome. All right. What does a sterile cockpit mean?
No talking, texting, phones while you're getting ready to do maneuvers or get ready to take off.
Perfect. Takeoff, taxiing, landing. Exactly. Anything that's not safety of flight, right? When should you use a progressive taxi?
Come on, somebody. Joanna.
When you are unfamiliar with the airport.
Perfect. Yes. When you are unfamiliar with the airport, you can always request a progressive taxi. And I've seen people even do this at non-towered airports. You know, if you have other people in the pattern or on the ground, I've multiple times been able to help other people out when they're like, hey, where's the fuel pump here? And I'm like, oh, you actually have to cross the runway and take this other taxiway on the other side of where you would think it is. And so use your resources. And then lastly, where can you find those hotspots? Here's a hint.
Airport diagram.
Yes, beautiful. Love it. Thank you. Thank you for your participation.
And
Okay.
one thing on the heads down, just to, one quick thing on that, in the jets and other two persons aircrafts that we fly, or even in a Cessna, if you must put your head down for whatever reason, let's say you need to check your phone because you've got a kid that's in daycare and you're worried, just tell the other pilot, as long as they've got control of what's going on, that I'm going to go heads down your controls. And then that they're aware of that. I do that a lot of times when I'm flying in a two-person airplane and I need to write something down, or I need to look down at my flight. So I go, even though the other person is flying and the other person is already taxiing and I'm not, and I'm on the right side, I'll still tell them, hey, I'm going heads down. Because sometimes the flying pilot on the left side assumes that the one on the right is really paying attention to where he's going. And that's not the case. So that's just my little tidbit on that.
No, I think that's a great point, Jamie. Thank you. That is a great point. Yeah, I can't tell you the number of times I've watched other training planes just, barrel right towards me, and I've had to say, oh, let's go over here, get out of their way, because
They're not watching.
they've got a very important place to be, clearly. All right, so that was runway incursion avoidance. Does anyone have any questions? Want an example of briefing anything, so on and so forth? Happy brains? Okay. Okay, so now we're going to talk about visual illusions. I felt that this was fairly relevant because right now in Sacramento, we have a bunch of smoke. Actually, today was lovely. It cleared up quite a bit, but our visibility has been faltering between, 3 to 10 miles visibility almost every couple hours due to the smoke. And so that causes a lot of illusions. And so I thought it was a good day to just discuss other illusions that you will come across in your flying career. So of course, we always talk about the relationship between your physical condition and your vision. So if you don't sleep enough, your eyes aren't going to work as well. If you have medication or just dry eyes in general, your eyes have a hard time focusing or filtering light. And if you don't eat properly before flying, especially when you become a CFI, always keep granola bars in your flight bag. So there's a few things that we want to discuss, right? So things that are just environmental that can degrade your vision. So dim illumination can make small print or numbers really hard to read on charts, instruments, etc. So in the daytime, I usually have the brightness on my ForeFlight up pretty high. At nighttime, it is the opposite. Dark adaptation, right? So when you go do your night flight, you always want to make sure that you, before it starts to get dark, turn down the brightness on your phone, turn down the brightness of your iPad, set up your headlamp so that it's on that red color and it's not going to blind you with white light as soon as you get in the airplane, because your dark adaptation is lost really quickly as soon as you are you come into contact with that really bright light. So a trick I learned, if you have to go to the bathroom in the middle of the night, is you have to turn on a light, is to close one eye while you do it. And then once you turn off the light, the other eye is still there. And then, so yeah, when night flying, we utilize off-center viewing and try to avoid really bright light for at least 30 minutes before you get into flight. Excessive light can produce glare and cause watery eyes, squinting, temporary blindness, right? All things that we don't like. Dirty windscreens is a big one. You'll find a lot of people never want to clean their windshields. Sure, it's not the most luxurious part of flying, but I'm sure you all remember the first few times you started to actually spot other planes and you recognized, oh, they just look like small bugs, right? So if your windshield is covered in many small bugs, it makes it much harder to spot those other planes. And then also, of course, smoke, haze, dust, rain, flying towards the sun, that's all going to reduce your ability to find other traffic, which is a really important part of VFR flying. Night vision. All right, so we're going to talk about the vestibular and visual illusions that a lot of these I've encountered, and a lot of these you will read and learn about, especially when they come out with accident reports and things of that nature, is a huge part of flying, right? Your body, unfortunately, is built to be on the ground. So when you hurl it into a metal tube through the air, your body starts to play tricks on you. And so if we are aware of these things, it'll make it a lot easier to recognize them and avoid falling victim to them, right? So maintain orientation by the use of proper instrument scanning procedures when you have to. So let's talk about the inner ear. So here we have the inner ear. We have these 3 fluid-filled canals: middle ear, station tube, inner ear, eardrum, and the main canal. And so you have these little hairs inside of these tubes. They're right in there. And so they actually are what tells you what you're doing. So my ear hairs right now are like, she's sitting upright, right? She's exactly where she's supposed to be. When my student takes off, my little ear hairs do this. And I'm like, okay, we're taking off. And so this is really how your body is able to recognize what you're doing. Unfortunately, when you lose or your outside visibility degrades, this actually decreases, or this starts to play tricks on you, I should say. And so that's what these are going to really go into. So we'll start with these 3. The leans is essentially caused by the abrupt correction of a bank that was undetected, right? So especially when you start doing foggle work and wearing the hood there, it's really easy to unintentionally get into a little bit of a bank. And as soon as you recognize it, you're like, oh my gosh, and you rapidly roll back. And then now you're sitting there, your wings are off to the right, but your body's like this, kind of sideways, because your body is trying to right this angle. And so it's essentially telling you that you're wrong, right? You feel like you're upright, but you're actually turning. This was something I experienced, I think, the first time I went to truly into a cloud in IMC under instrument flight. And I was flying along and I said, I'm flying straight and level, but my attitude indicator and my heading indicator are telling me that I'm turning. And it took me a few seconds and I had to consciously be like, no, Christina, you are wrong. You are wrong. And the instruments are right. And I had to fight everything in my body that said, no, you're sitting upright, and turn the plane so that it truly was upright and flying straight and level. So here's another visual of that, right? So you forget that you're turning. So you go ahead and stop the turn, roll it to the left, but the abrupt roll made you think that now you're rolling in the other direction. Right, and then we have Coriolis illusion. So that fluid I was talking about before, what I always say is that essentially you start that turn, the fluid goes whoop over there, and you're in a turn. Your body's like, yep, I'm turning. And then you're in that turn for so long that your body's like, okay, we're done turning now, right? And the plane is still turning, but your body is saying, no, we stopped turning. And so you can minimize this effect by just keeping your head still, trusting those instruments. Another one is the graveyard spiral. So this is observed by loss of altitude and a constant rate turn. And it's similar to that Coriolis illusion in that the fluid in your ear told you that you're no longer turning, right? And this last part right here, disoriented pilot will pull back, tightening the spiral and increasing altitude loss. This is something students do a lot when you are first learning the steep turns, right? You go into that steep bank and you're starting to descend and you just start pulling. And as a result, the airplane actually continues to roll and the steep turn just tightens. And so it's the same concept and you start to descend. And so that's the graveyard spiral. And then next we'll talk about, any questions so far? Indifference? Okay. Jamie, any questions from you?
Nope, it's all good. You're doing great. Awesome. Very informative and not boring.
Thanks, Jamie.
No, not at all. It's very, very informative. Good energy.
Good.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay.
She's like, I just don't want to be boring. I said, you're not going to be boring.
Okay. So the next one we have is somatogravic illusion. And there was an accident not too long ago, a few years back, with Atlas Air. And they definitely, one of the main causes was the inability to overcome this illusion by the pilot that was flying, right? So this is that rapid acceleration can create this nose illusion. And so the disoriented pilot will push the nose into a dive. And the opposite is also true. Rapid deceleration can create this illusion that you've pitched down, right? So you're coming into land and then all of a sudden you go around. That rapid acceleration may make you think, even though the nose is like this, it's actually like this. It'll make you think that you're on the cusp of stall. And on the other hand of that, if you were rapidly decelerating, that could make you think that your nose is a lot lower than it really is, and resulting in you pulling up the nose when it does not need to be pulled up, right? And so that happened in that other accident, the Atlas Air accident, where the pilot went around and felt that illusion and called the stall, even though there was no warnings or indication that there was a stall, and he pushed the nose beyond the point of the aircraft being able to recover. And so that's a big illusion that will come about in your flying. Here's a cool video I found. So on aircraft carriers, they do this thing. So I don't know if you notice his hands were on the dash. And this is because this rapid acceleration is going to cause them to think that the plane is nose down or to over control the plane. And so while they actually launch them, their rule is that they do not touch the controls until the aircraft is off the carrier. So you'll see him give the cue, his hands are up, his hands stay up until the plane is off, and then his hands go onto the controls. Of course, we're not on carriers, so this isn't something we're going to do. But so you have an idea of just how intense that illusion can be. Oh gosh, sorry. No, okay. Then we have the inversion illusion. So similar to somatographic illusion, a change from a climb to straight and level flight can create this feeling, which it sounds funny because you're like, I don't understand how that would work. But your inner ear, man, it does its thing. And so this can create the illusion that now you're falling backwards. And so you might push the aircraft down, and then that would really upset the little hairs in your ears and put you into a different sort of upset in situation. And so that's why when you do instrument flight, right, everything is standard rate, standard climbs, mild. We're not trying to upset our inner ear, but we're also relying entirely upon those instruments. And then elevator illusion. So especially on days like today where it's really windy and bumpy and the aircraft gets bumped around. Sometimes, of course, yes, it does actually pitch up the nose, but a lot of times it's just bumping straight up, and it's creating this illusion that it bumped the nose up and that you're going to have to correct it somehow. And so being aware of this will kind of help you not fall into its pitfalls and over control your aircraft. All right, and then here are some other ones that will definitely come up a lot more. So those last illusions I was just talking about tend to relate a lot to like night flying or low visibility or actual IMC flying, right? Lots of trusting your instruments. But what happens when we go into a VFR situation and we still have these illusions? Because everyone always thinks, oh, these things refer to purely IFR. I'm just a private pilot right now, or I'm just a student pilot. That won't happen to me. These happen to my VFR private pilot students on a regular basis. So it is really useful to be aware of these. So we'll start with the false horizon. I got the picture on the next runway. So here's a false horizon, right? So at night, the horizon may be hard to discern due to dark terrain or misleading light patterns on the ground. So you see this pattern on the ground and you're like, oh, there's the horizon, and you line your plane up. But over here, here's the actual horizon. It's too dark to recognize what is the horizon. And if you look right here, you can see his instruments saying that, no, that's the horizon over there. And so recognizing, always verifying, right? Trust but verify at all times. To do autokinesis in the dark, a stationary light will appear to move after it's stared at for a few seconds. So if you see a light on the ground and you really focus on it for too long, you're going to start to be able to believe that, oh, that's another plane, or that's a car that's moving, that item or whatever that light is actually moving. And so make sure that you're not, over focusing on something. The runway width and runway terrain and slopes illusion. This one is one that is the most common I see with students. So a narrow runway can create the illusion that you're higher than you actually are, and a wider runway can create the illusion that you're lower than you actually are. And then upsloping runway can create an illusion that you're higher. Downsloping can create the illusion that you're lower, right? So if we look here, the downsloping runway, here's your normal approach, but it's going to look like it's more intense than usual because the runway is actually sloping away from you. And then with an upsloping runway, you're more likely to do a shallower approach because it looks like you're higher. And then the runway width one is the most common one because around here we've got runways that are 150 feet wide, and then we've got some that are 50 feet wide. And usually what happens is they go to the 50-foot wide runway and they're thinking, their peripheral vision says that, oh, this is where I usually flare, but the runway is just narrower than usual. And so they end up hitting the ground pretty hard because it just came up faster. They were expecting a wider runway. Anyone have questions about the runway illusions? No? Yes. No. If anyone's ever landed at Auburn, you've also got that nice bowl. So runways come in all shapes and sizes, and they all.
I was going to ask, are there airports around that are good examples of some of these?
Yes. So Auburn We normally take off runway 25. That's the prevailing calm wind runway. But if you land runway 7, there's this huge bowl in the middle of the runway. So it has this downslope in the middle of it. And so you come into flare and you look at the end of the runway, which sloped up over here, and you end up flaring a lot higher off the ground than you're used to. And it results in a hard runway if you're not kind of prepared for that. And then another example is Sutter County Airport, which is right next to Marysville. Their runway is 50 foot wide. And so we're mostly used to 100 to 150 foot wide runways. And so when you come in to land on that one, students tend to hit the ground a little bit harder because they're used to their peripheral vision telling them that, oh, this is where I usually flare, when in reality, at this narrow runway, that's just the ground. Did that answer your question?
It did. Thank you.
Good question too. I was thinking.
Go ahead.
Oh no, that was just a good question.
Oh.
And
Thanks,
and I was just saying thank you. And I'll email Jamie for this presentation because it's really helpful.
I love when things I make get used. Featureless terrain. This is one that I've seen in action multiple times. So this is the absence of ground features can make your aircraft appear to be higher than it actually is, right? So my example here is you're gonna have to do a night cross country in your private pilot training. And I always go to Chico because 1, it's like 52 miles away. So it's just long enough to be cross country. 2, everything around the airport is pitch black. It's far away from the town and it's pitch black. So featureless terrain happens over open water when there's no ground lighting, no distinct objects. And this causes you to think that you're a lot higher than usual. And so I remember my student came in on final and he was pretty low on final for how far we were from the runway. And I was almost ready to say something and take the controls when he said, I'm high, but I see 4 red lights. And I let the cogs turn for a couple seconds. And then I just said, well, which one do you think is right? And that's when he added the power and, got back on top of glide slope and came in to do a pretty normal landing at that point. But when you have no ground references surrounding the airport, just the runway like this, it's really easy to get yourself into thinking that the runway, that you are at a much higher altitude than you really are. And then atmospheric illusion. So fog penetration can create this illusion of pitching up, right? Because if there's fog on the ground and light comes up through that fog, it appears as though the ground has changed its orientation, which usually doesn't actually happen. Usually it's your aircraft changing orientation. And so that will easily mess with you. Ground lighting illusion, lights in a straight line, such as along a road, can appear to be runway, approach lights, so on and so forth. Bright runway lights can create an illusion of you being closer than actual. So always an option if you're doing your night flying at a towered airport and they have all these really bright lights on. If it's not that busy, you could always ask them to lower the intensity of the lights. If you're at a pilot controlled airport, you can click the button 5 times to go to medium or 3 times to go to low, which actually helps a lot with your depth perception in the dark. See and avoid concept. So always maintain vigilant lookout for traffic, right? If you have a plane in sight, it's really easy to just focus on that one and say, there's the plane, it's in sight. But unfortunately, there's normally more than 2 planes up there at once. So keep an eye for the other spots as well. Proper visual scanning, right? So you can only focus on small areas. So you use in the daytime, you want to use short, regularly spaced movements. So I normally just say little pies. I'm kind of scanning this pie and then I'm going to the next little pie and then the next little pie. And I always have to remind myself that I'm just looking for a bug. It's literally just a bug. It's so small. And he's out there. And then at night, right? So ATC says, oh, traffic's at 3 o'clock. You want to kind of look at 2 o'clock. You don't want to look right at the spot that they told you to look at because it's going to be really hard for your eyes to focus on that. Here's about eyes, right? You're going to read about your rods and your cones. So your rods are for night and your cones are for the daytime. Don't fixate on your instruments, right? So I always say when we're doing VFR flying, we use the 90-10 rule. So we're spending 90% of our time outside, looking out of the cockpit, and 10% of the time kind of scanning and verifying our instruments. And so that's why when you first start flying, you want to get comfortable with what instrument does what and knowing where it's located in the cockpit if you don't have a standard instrument panel. And just kind of verifying that, okay, my pitch looks right and my altitude is remaining the same. You know, that visual reference I'm using to fly in that direction is still there, and my heading is still pretty close to what I started at. And so just using that 90-10 rule of spending most of my time out there, just verifying in here 10% of the time. To do proper clearing procedures, right? So scan the approach area for traffic, even with a tower. So they say cleared to take off. I still pivot and I double check and I say, yep, final's clear. Off I go. Climbs and descents. All right, going to turn crosswind, going to turn anywhere. Always just lift up that wing if you're in a high wing. Rock your wing if you're in a low wing. Take a look. Okay. Straight and level. Maintain that consistent scan for traffic. Traffic pattern entry. This is something I see a lot of the time. Make sure you're not descending into the traffic pattern, right? You always want to enter the pattern at altitude. If you have to fly over the runway for any reason, you're either going to fly at pattern altitude and go directly into the downwind, or you're going to fly above pattern altitude, exit the pattern, and return on the 45, right? So there's a few different ways. When you start practicing at VOR sites, these are highly transited areas. A lot of times they converge with airports. So you want to make sure you're vigilant to look out for other traffic. And training operations is a big one, especially around here when we go up, you know, west of Lincoln, north of McClellan, or over the lake. There's a lot of other airplanes training. So always want to make sure we say, okay, clear right, clear left, above and below. And I do this when we're taxiing as well, that, okay, we're clear right, we're clear left, and we're turning to the right. It does seem like overkill, but you'd be surprised the amount of times I've had, okay, we're clear right. And then I look left and say, we're not clear left. And so, you know, we just keep on trucking a little bit and then we go do our maneuvers. Knowing your aircraft blind spots, such as around the doorpost, raising and lowering your wings, especially with low wing airplanes. A big collision hazard is, you know, a Piper low wing airplane and a Cessna being right on top of each other, right? Because neither of them can see each other. And so knowing those blind spots and how to kind of maneuver in a way that you could see them is going to be very helpful. So the relationship between your aircraft speed. So this is what they call the closure rate. So if two aircraft are each going 100 knots and they're headed directly towards each other, their closure rate is now 200 knots, right? Because each of them are moving fast, just as fast, and therefore they're gonna collide with each other faster. And so here's just a quick video to see how close that closure rate is. There's the airplane in the distance. I think this is a 900 knot closure rate. And in less than a second from the time he kind of comes into frame, he's gone, right? And so that's a 900 knot closure rate. Hopefully it's nothing that extreme with us, but nonetheless, these near misses are one of those things that will really, sorry, there you go. Yeah, really get your blood going. So collisions can happen anywhere, but recognizing that is more likely where aircraft tend to cluster. Most mid-airs happen near airports or VORs or airways, but for the most part, it's near the airports, especially in these training environments with these busy traffic patterns. So just like the taxiing, defensive flying, defensive traffic patterning, whatever you need to do to just kind of always be on the lookout, because you can't guarantee that the other person is. Collision avoidance, we talked about this in terms of taxiing on the ground, but same thing, visual obstructions in the cockpit, right? So if you're using an iPad, make sure that you have either a yoke mount or have it on your lap somewhere. Try to avoid those big bulky window mounts that actually end up blocking a lot of your view. Keep that windscreen clean, use your lights on the plane. When you have the opportunity, use flight following, right? It's really helpful to have somebody looking out for you. And yeah, that is illusions and collision avoidance. Does anyone have any questions?
Thank you, Christina. That was really awesome.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. Anybody questions before we wrap it up for tonight? No questions. Well, thank you all for showing up, and sorry I couldn't show my face because I've just been devastated here, but Christina, I made her come in and step in, and she's awesome. So we're going to be here for all you guys. Next week, or 2 weeks from today, I'll be in Williamton, Delaware, doing my recurrent for the Challenger. I don't know what time my sessions are, so if you don't see me, you will see one of all of us here to teach. I'm going to try to be here if I can. It's just they give you some crazy hours when you're there, and I have no control over it until I get there. But if you think of something you want us to teach you next week, shoot me an email, and we have this on video, and we'll send it to you if you want it. And Christina, thank you so much again for stepping it up and teaching.
Absolutely.
Yeah, thank you.
I'll share the links to these PowerPoints too. So when you post the video, you can post the links. If somebody
Awesome. Thank you. And thank you all for the support with the Richard, and some of you that met him, you know, he was awesome, and keep flying. And his little motto was always pay it forward. So he did a lot of good deeds. So if you could go out and do a good deed and say this one's for Richard, that would make me happy.
Thanks, Jamie. We
Thank
love
you.
you.
Thank
You
you
look
all.
very beautiful for saying that you've been. No, really, you do.
Oh, thanks.
I was thinking the same thing. You look like you're
God.
glowing.
I know. Thank you. Oh gosh. Well, I'm a good faker, apparently. So I've got my healing after loss book, and I've got all kinds of fun stuff over here. So anyways, love you all. Thank you.
You too.
Love you, Jamie. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you, Christina. Thanks.
Lots of
That's
hugs.
okay. Have a good night.